Oh, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here celebrating the Leverhulme Trust tonight. I think we've heard something from Simon about how generous the form of engagement is from the Trust, and that's certainly my experience too. So, as Simon said, I research the history of emotions, which you might not have come across before, but my field is really about how our ideas about emotions have changed across time and space, and how these changing cultural narratives act on us as individuals, changing how we behave and how we think about how we feel. And in the past 5 years, supported by a Philip Leverhulme Prize, I've been thinking a lot about the emotional history of friendship, which resulted in this book, Bad Friend, which is a history of women's friendship in the 20th century. Now, this book really came out of a moment of crisis in my own friendships. When I was in my early 30s, that's almost 20 years ago now, I had a really catastrophic breakdown with one of my closest female friends. And as I've since learned is very, very common, this really made me lose confidence in my ability to make and keep friends. I looked around me at the often glamorized, aspirational portrayal of female friends, and I feared I wasn't really measuring up. But it also came out of our shared contemporary predicament. We're living in a widely reported loneliness epidemic brought on by social technologies, a cost of living crisis, longer working hours. Do these kind of brittle portrayals of friendship also play their part in making us lonelier than ever? And I think they do. So what I wanted to do was to write a history of friendship that told a different kind of story. I wanted to know about the imperfections and challenges of friendship, about moments of ambivalence and doubt, about explosive endings and moments when things sort of fade out. But I really wanted to know about the courage that friendship takes. And in the lives of many 20th century women, I found those stories, and I'll share some of them with you. But before that, I just wanted to give a very quick history lesson, because it's often claimed that women are more natural and instinctive at making friends than men are, which is very peculiar, because for about 2,000 years, men were mostly considered to be the real experts in friendship. In the 16th century, as Europe was entering a new age of explosive intellectual activity, the ideal of male friendship really flourished. The writer and lawyer Michel de Montaigne described in soaring and passionate terms his profound bond with his closest friend, the writer and lawyer Le Bercy. And other men wrote impassioned letters to one another. Some are even buried alongside each other. Montaigne's essay on friendship remains very widely read today, and this is a modern edition of it. But in fact, in this essay, Montaigne says that women are really not fit for friendship. He says that they lack the moral fiber and emotional stamina really required to withstand such an enduring knot, he says. So in the 18th century, these ideas and attitudes started to shift, and by the middle of the 19th century, middle-class Victorian women saw themselves presented in literature and advice manuals as tender-hearted and sympathetic and instinctual and natural friends. In fact, having a friend or group of friends really, by this point, had become a kind of essential component of a successful female life, an idea I think that we still carry with us today. In the 20th century, there was another change as women embraced new freedoms, moved to cities, entered education and workplaces in far greater numbers, and sort of became a new kind of friendship icon. They appeared in fashion magazines and agony aunt columns and popular fiction, and most visible of all on film and on TV. They were symbols of femininity and intimacy, yes, but also of independence and defiance. But of course, the more visible these friends became, the more patrolled and controlled they were. There was an outpouring of advice books and manuals, how to tell a good friend from a bad one, how to behave with friends in certain sorts of situations, in the workplace or with neighbours, at a wedding and so on. So there was an enormous amount of information about friendships that were potentially quite self-conscious making. So I wanted to know, how did women navigate this world where their friendships were reflected back in so many fantasies, but also rules? But as I began this work, I immediately encountered a problem, and the problem was knowledge. How do we know? Today we are talking about knowledge in an age of disinformation. But what kind of knowledge can we really have about a friendship in the past? I mean, what kind of knowledge can we really have about anyone's friendship in the present? Friendship is such an ephemeral part of life, and it leaves so few traces behind. But also each friendship is as singular as the next one. Friendships take so many forms. Some are transient, some are very practical, some are more neighbourly. Unlike marriage and family life, our friendships are rarely shaped by contracts and public rituals. We choose our friends freely. They bear witness to our most secret selves. When I began, I imagined sifting through letters and diaries, probably of famous women, because those are the kinds of letters and diaries that are usually kept. But the stories I wanted to hear were more ordinary. I wanted to know about workmates and their allies, women thrown together navigating city life, friendships which were imperfect but also unglamorous and more valuable for it. These are the kinds of stories we only really hear about in scraps and whispers. And as I said, maybe it's really impossible to know the truth of someone else's friendship at all. In the history of emotions, one approach we use to try and understand how people might have felt in the past is to try and look at the rules and how the rules governing emotions and their display might have changed. So which emotions can you show and how can you show them, and which ones must be hidden and withheld. And we certainly see these rules changing when it comes to friendship. In the early 1900s, there was a huge craze among schoolgirls for boarding school stories. This one is by the doyenne of girls' boarding school books, Angela Brazel. I think she published around 50 novels and was, in fact, quite a big celebrity at her time. Now, I remember first time I read one of her books in the British Library, and I remember being kind of gobsmacked at how the friendship between the girls was portrayed. There were declarations of love, there was kissing, there was holding hands, there was cuddling up in bed together. It was very romantic, and it was extremely different from the kind of book, boarding school book that I had grown up reading, which was Enid Blyton's 1950s Mallory Towers series, which, if anyone knows that really the most kind of physically affectionate the girls get in those books are, when they clap each other on the back because one of them's won at hockey or something like that. So this is a very, very different kind of emotional world. How is it possible that within 50 years, which is not really very long, the style of girlhood friendship could have changed so much? The answer is that change was very deliberate. In the early 1900s, fears about educating women, particularly educating them at university level, were still widely circulating. And there was a real anxiety that if you educate women, they will forego marriage and men and motherhood kind of all together, and then they will work and they will get all of their kind of emotional support from close friends. So that was considered a real threat. The other real threat that was beginning to emerge in the early 1900s was about lesbianism, which was becoming more visible. So headmistresses, parents, psychologists were all sufficiently alarmed and decided to intervene in these friendships. In one assembly, a boarding school headmistress called very emotional, intense friendship a form of mental instability. In some schools, holding hands was banned, and kissing was only allowed on birthdays. And in one school, the girls were forbidden from helping each other wash their hair, which I find rather sad, actually. So in a few short decades, the expected style of female friendship, particularly among young girls, had radically transformed, creating this kind of clearer bifurcation of romantic love and friendship that we have today. But what this episode really reminds us, I think, of is the fact that being in a friendship is as much about style and what is culturally acceptable as it is about intuition and feelings of emotional affinity. I also looked at accounts by friends themselves of their friendships. So Madeleine Doty, whose photograph is there on the left, was a highly educated, upper middle class, 36-year-old lawyer who went undercover in a New York women's prison in 1913 in order to report on the conditions that she found there. And afterwards she wrote this book, Society's Misfits. And in the book she described striking up a very particular kind of friendship with a woman named Minerva Jones. Now, Minerva Jones was 18 years old. She was African American. She was a morphine addict and a sex worker, and she was serving 2 years for having stolen a watch. Now, of course, all we can know about their friendship, that's what Madeleine Doty calls it, is what we know through Doty's own eyes with her preconceptions and her biases. But in the account, we glimpse some very familiar rituals of forming friendships, of how people build trust through sharing food and information, how they take risks on each other's behalves, and how they console and comfort one another. So these are all very familiar parts of friendship making. But the account also reminds us that power differences play a very important role in friendships too. Doty seems to expect the younger woman to take care of her and give her a lot of emotional support, to be what the writer and activist Claudia Jones would much later call a natural mammy, so for a white woman more used to having a black maid than a black friend. So their story reminds us that friendships, which are so often held up as ideals of egalitarian love and commitment, are not immune from questions of power. Part, I think, of why it is so difficult to understand what other people's friendships are like is that, of course, that people are quite reluctant to speak openly about the difficulties they might experience with their friends. And as I began to interview people as I got later in the 20th century, I heard often how uncomfortable people felt talking openly about their friends, how treacherous it felt. But then I came across this treasure trove, the Mass Observation Archive, which since 1939 has sent out loose questionnaires or directives to a pool of volunteer writers, asking them to describe their lives, did in the early 2000s ask volunteers to write about their experiences of having had a difficult friendship. There are pages and pages of responses, most of them by women. And there were certainly dramatic betrayals in those pages, friends who stole husbands or lied to people or tattled to the boss. But mostly they were very ordinary kinds of stories of misconnections and minor hurts, of cherished feelings of resentment, and moments of imbalance. And they make for very relatable reading. But it is, I think, a different kind of knowledge again. We've seen quite partial forms of knowledge, but this is a different kind of knowledge based on anecdotes and storytelling and even on gossip. And It might seem nosy glimpsing into the worlds of friendship past, but as Phyllis Rose, a literary critic, wrote, nosiness about how other people live is really driven by our own desire to know how to live ourselves. And as I studied the experiences of women friends in the 20th century, I found, of course, a very different picture to these very over-idealized, oversimplified portrayals which circulate today. It was a different kind of knowledge, both intriguing and affecting, and I felt less alone for it. In an age of computer-generated disinformation, where we're all more isolated from each other than ever, this kind of human knowledge about friendship is, I think, the kind of knowledge that we need. Okay, thank you.